So, what are my professional goals? Well, I basically have it boiled down to two main things. First of all, I'm a sports communication major, and I definitely want to, it's a guarantee that I want to be in the sports media world. Now, there's two main branches that I was thinking about mainly doing. One of them has to do with like the reporting, like journalism side, and the other is the like content producing and like the stuff that you see on TV and the stuff you see on Netflix and stuff like that, or YouTube, the content creation stuff. Starting off with like the journalism side, I think that sports journalism is something that has really always grabbed my attention. And when I say journalism, I mean like whether that's being a reporter and like talking directly to players and asking them questions, like the people that you see at the press conference, or maybe it's the people that you never see, like the columnists and the writers at, you know, the New York Post or ESPN or Fox or Yahoo or CBS or the Philadelphia Inquirer, wherever that may be or whatever that looks like, just writing the stories and producing like the written stuff. And then also like I think also I would be interested in the actual content creation. So like the stuff that you see on TV and like the sports documentaries and like that ESPN does, like their 30 for 30s or like NFL films or stuff like that. That's not like live broadcast or like, you know, like how you see the highlight tapes on YouTube for like an NFL game. And like I said, it doesn't matter high school, college, NFL. I mostly want to focus on football when it comes to these things, but I am open to other sports, especially to like get me to my end destination. But I just really love sports. I really love football, basketball. I'm starting to grow in baseball, and I'm starting to grow into soccer, and I love track. So I basically just want to be in the sports media world telling the stories of these athletes because it's so inspiring seeing what a lot of these major athletes come from. And like in our world, in our society, like athletes are heroes to a lot of us growing up, and sports are very important to our culture and the world. And it's something that I think really needs to be celebrated, is these athletes and their stories and being able to tell them in the best way possible, both in current events and then when we look back, so that way we don't forget all the greatness that we've seen. What type of text will these aspirations produce? I think that just to get this aspect kind of out the way, I know it may sound like cliche or corny what I'm about to say, but in all honesty, I really believe that the stories really kind of write themselves. The texts kind of write themselves. But obviously, someone has to actually put them together. And I think that it's important to understand what a story could mean in sports. A story doesn't have to be like something that you see in the newspaper or something that you see on like, you know, ESPN.com or something like that. A story can be told in sports in many different ways, whether that's by social media or whether that's just keeping certain names like always in recirculation so that way we don't lose these names. I think that if I go like the reporting slash journalism route, obviously my main focus would be on like current events and like current athletes and like people that are currently relevant to the time period in sports. And so for me, like producing these types of stories, like these great stories in sports, would look like maybe like starting from a kid going to college and maybe he couldn't afford it, or maybe he didn't get a scholarship, or, you know, maybe they had it all. Maybe they had it all figured out. Maybe a kid from high school was a top recruit, had a lot of money, had all the resources, go to college, everything's easy breezy. And then sometimes they get to the professional level and they crash and burn because they realize it's a lot different in the sports world. The sports world is one that like doesn't wait on anybody, not players, not coaches, not personnel not decision makers, not reporters. Nobody is safe in the sports world because it's constantly changing. And so I think if I were a reporter, I would definitely focus on getting the best out of someone's background and trying to illustrate what that means to what you're seeing on the screen today. And then conversely, I think everything that goes into like reporting and journalism for sports, where it's like doing all the research and doing all the background and talking to players and talking to different coaches and talking to, different connections all over the place and getting a bunch of different opinions. If you can do that stuff and portray that on screen, you've opened up a whole new world of being able to tell stories in sports. Content creators all the time on TikTok and YouTube and all these different social media platforms that we have access to now, where they make sports so much more joyful. There's people that make, videos about telling the stories of certain players, certain scandals, certain things in sports history, certain players that are important, maybe some things that didn't really get as much attention in the mainstream media back in the old days when we didn't have as much technology and as much mediums as we do now. And if you can do everything to visualize, then it adds a whole different method of other people being able to contextualize the text that you're trying to produce. And that's something that definitely intrigues me a lot, and it's something that I haven't really thought about too much on how I would do it, but I can picture the goal. And if I was ever able to figure that out, I'm going to continue to work at it, and hopefully I get there one day where I can portray these stories exactly how I want to. The most influential theory that I have learned in this course is hegemony theory. Basically, what that suggests is that in a society, people who are in power, people who are higher up in the social class, they basically want to both consciously and unconsciously maintain their position at the top, while also at the same time, people who are less advantaged, people who are not part of the higher class, both consciously and unconsciously consent to this social structure. Because of this, whatever like the norm is for a majority group will also become the consensus for everyone. Some people benefit from these norms and some people do not, but hegemony basically theorizes that we all, no matter our social construct and no matter if we consciously are doing it or not, are allowing that structure to stay in place because we don't feel the need to challenge it. Hegemony theory has been like the most influential concept to me this semester because it's the one that I can see most often. So basically, like, as I'm like growing, like I'm 19 years old, I'm a sophomore in college, and I'm constantly like observing and in the midst of developing like my own worldview. And I think that as I observe the world, at least from my perspective, one of the things that I observe is hegemony and like how it's basically deep rooted into many capitalist societies around the world. There are only 4 countries out of the 200 plus that aren't capitalist societies. Obviously, not every capitalist society is created equal, but the one that I live in, the United States, definitely is heavily impacted by hegemony practices. And it's something that as someone who isn't part of that higher class, as someone who doesn't get the advantages of our government being as rooted in hegemony as it is, it's something that I've grown to really challenge and kind of resent about this country and ultimately other countries who follow similar styles of government and styles of society, basically. It's been so fascinating to me for like me to write my final paper on hegemony and also learn about hegemony in class and kind of realize that hegemony is almost like the enemy of capitalism. Like, capitalism in theory is supposed to be a good thing for everybody. Like, it's a free market, it's room for everybody to grow, it's like equal opportunity for everybody to be able to get to the top. And that's where you should strive to be as an individual who doesn't have it as good. But in practicality, the market is not all that free, because the 1% of this country's citizens occupy most of that wealth and most of that power and most of that structure. And so because of that, capitalism actually hurts a lot of people, a lot of regular people especially, more often than it does help. And I think that is due to hegemony ruining the integrity of what capitalism aimed to be. And just as a supplement to that, I find it equally as fascinating to see like how our world goes about challenging hegemony and challenging a lot of these anti-average consumer practices and roots that our economy and social structure is rooted in. So how can I use hegemony theory to inform my future texts? I think just using my knowledge about hegemony and how it impacts the world and looking deeper into how it impacts the sports world, I can kind of use my platform and use my ability to tell stories in kind of like a counter hegemony type of way. What I mean by that is, for example, I'm going to use women's basketball as an example. I feel like women's basketball is not as appreciated and not as nationally loved by Americans because we were taught to feel that way. Just like women in other professions, they have struggled to kind of burst onto the scene and compete with these other major leagues, or even just for the WNBA, they've struggled to compete with their male counterpart. And I feel like that is mostly because people in the sports media don't talk about the WNBA enough. I think that we were taught by the upper class, and it just became a social norm that a woman is supposed to be feminine and a woman is supposed to be classy. And because of that, the competitive nature that we see in women's basketball isn't even as appreciated as it would be if the men did the exact same thing. And I blame that on the media, because as members of the media, their voices are so powerful and so influential to the rest of the world. And so in that case, like, I'm saying we as like me as a journalist, we are the 1% in this aspect. We control so much of what people pay attention to in sports and which players we hear about and what things are going on and how they're doing it. We have so much to do with how these athletes are portrayed. And I would say we have way more power over how an athlete is remembered or how an athlete is viewed than the actual athlete does themselves. And the WNBA was just an example. I feel like there's a lot of underrepresentation in the sports media. There are underrepresented communities in the sports world. Like, for example, we only really hear about the Power 5 schools, which are basically like the best of the best colleges, and we only hear about like the powerhouse high schools. And I think that's a problem, because I feel like with our platforms as media members, we should be promoting the people who need help. If you're already at a Power 5 school, or if you're already at a really dominant high school, or if you're already like a really, really talented and highly recruited player, you really don't need that much help, especially in this new world where like college athletes can get paid off of their name, image, and likeness. And so I feel like more than ever, the underrepresentation in sports has to stop. And so I think with my platform, how hegemony is going to inform my future text, it's going to be a lot of elements of counter hegemony. I think it's not only important to highlight what the athlete or what the player did to overcome the hegemony of the society that they grew up in. Representation in sports basically rooted in hegemony because, like I said, we decided a long time ago which players and which kinds of athletes and which types of things that we want to portray on the screen and how we want to portray them, not even just on the screen but behind the scenes, just in the sports news circulation. And I think that it's important to counter that. And with my platform, I just feel like honestly everything that I've learned about hegemony is going to teach me to be less ignorant with my writing, for lack of a better word. In order to tell the story the way that it needs to be told, I feel like you have to take into consideration some of the outside factors and some of the things that you wouldn't normally think of, like beyond service level. And especially want to do my part to expose hegemony in not only sports media, but just in this country and its opportunities as much as I possibly can, because it's something that means a lot to me and it's something that I feel like every average person can relate to, which is majority of us in society. And as someone who comes from that, I feel like it's important to represent them. And so I will do that as much as I can with my future text, with my writing, with my content, whatever I go and end up venturing out doing. That is going to be my primary concern.